Another Ken Wheeler video. So they're labeled. Don't watch them if you don't want to hear the same kind of crap over and over again, because it's probably what it's going to be. But somebody's got to do it, I think. I think it's just, there's got to be somebody that tries to provoke what really should be taking place on just about every level. It's that everything should be talked about and examined and tested. And yeah, people just shouldn't be able to make claims, without dealing with the counter arguments. And it's like you thought the internet would have fixed that, but it just somehow it hasn't, because people are allowed to hide from scrutiny, and that's including regular physics.
So there's all these people that think I'm in the Illuminati. This omega reflector behind me. Someone's gonna try to divine some sort of reasoning behind that's behind me. It's like, oh, over here's a triangle. Yeah, Illuminati symbols. Of course, I never denied it.
Yeah, whatever. You have your whole other kind of whatever that airs of dragging Platonic crap into the present. So yes, you are sort of, and you are kind of a conspiracy theory nut.
Just kidding. As far as you know. There was a comedian that would always do that. He would say stuff. It's like, you're all wonderful in your own mind. Age of Reason, and I don't mean the original Age of Reason. I'm talking about like a new Age of Reason. And I'm certainly not against math. Let me first start out by saying that I have nothing against math.
Yeah, except they're using it in a rational manner. So anyway, genuine cosmic mechanics, atomism versus reality. So again, this whole word atomism doesn't really work in the modern world. I mean, we kind of all know that you don't break the earth up into little pieces of earth. That we know there's a periodic table of elements, and that atoms are made of bits, parts. At least we have identified with some degree of clarity, certain functional bits, especially protons and electrons. And, so atomism is kind of a stupid word. So if you want to, so this is really an argument against quanta, against reality, or quantum mechanics even. And again, I would argue that quantum electrodynamics wasn't an irrational science, where the new quantum mechanics of spooky action and the rest of it is, in my opinion, not rationally bound, not tied to facts.
However, 99.9% of you who took algebra and trig, you've forgotten all of it. Admit it, you've forgotten all of it. Now, unless you're going into electrical engineering, or engineering in general, or other particular fields that require a rudimentary understanding of things, what if the universe were so
Well, again, so this isn't about atomism versus reality, I guess, so he's going to start off mathematics versus reality. And I would share some critique in the sense that, I've watched some physics lectures, and some of them are just so dominated by a mathematical formula and very little examination of just kind of getting the idea of what's taking place, what the players are, the forces involved. And they do this with pendulums I'm watching now, pendulums with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 objects in them, and how all the different things will move because of they're tied to each other. And yeah, it's just tons of derivatives of equations, and very little examining of just getting the idea of what forces are happening. When this goes this way, what's that mean for this thing, and what was the state of it before, and so little look at the mechanics, and it's just all mathematics. No mechanics, all mathematics. And that's not very good mix in physics, in my opinion.
Comprehensible that if you had the primer, and nobody has the primer, the guy that actually came closest to the primer, and he only got about 60% of the way, was Walter Russell.
Who was a complete whack job. Go find Walter Russell quotes. so again, that's sort of like saying Tesla, or something. It's just such a mixed bag. a couple of insights maybe, and 98% just pulled out of the ass.
Boy, I have some suppressed works of Walter Russell. You know one thing that really pisses my butt off, and I got a lot of suppressed works.
Oh, whatever, suppressed works. Like that is a viable concept. I mean, it's almost like the new UFO is the suppression argument. The government kills people for knowing things and blah blah. I mean, it's just such a crock of shit. If anybody has any suppressed works out there, I will publish them. Please send me your suppressed works, and I will publish them. So I'm really not afraid of being killed for publishing the suppressed works.
I mean, I have a lot of suppressed works, meaning they are genuinely suppressed. They're not only not in print, but giving the information away is a big problem, and I'm not going to define the word problem for you.
Oh, see? Ooh, mysterious, mysterious. So people really buy into this crap, that they really think that is practical in this world. But this, it's the world of the truther, the world of the silly truthers who think a bunch of CIA agents were, wrapping explosives inside of the Twin Towers, while they're talking to their wives on the cell phones. Sure that happened.
Big problem, and I do mean problem. The guy that came closest to a perimeter was Walter Russell, about 60%. He never defined a field, he never...
Alright, so he says the same things over and over again. This is one of Ken's style things that are just pretty irritating, because this 20-minute video is really going to be a 4-minute video just done 10 times, well, 7 times.
Really explain magnetism. He never understood the geomagnetic precession. He never understood fundamentally what magnetism was.
Right, all of this magical action that's supposed to be taking place inside of a magnet, that for which there's no accounting for any of the force, any mechanism that creates all this perpetual energy inside of this magnet, and clearly no explanation for how that force is conveyed to the other magnet.
But that's okay. I mean, his book on the Universal One and a few of his other works, other than some of his esoteric stuff, was highly explicative of the nature of the universe. Nikola Tesla.
Ah, there. we knew that word was coming up. Nikola Tesla was a silly person. Generally speaking. I mean, you take an average of the Nikola Tesla life, and it's mostly being silly.
On field theory. Also is the case that the most field theory you could find is in the old works of Faraday. Not in Charles Proteus Steinmetz, Oliver Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell.
Let's understand. So this word fields always comes up, and I never really understood what people are talking about. Because I always thought of fields like fields of corn. So I said field, yeah, field is a field of something. Not of an ether, not of electromagnetism, not of some kind of new thing, like bent space. I never thought of fields that way. I always thought of fields as being a bunch of something, like a field of geese, or a field of something. And the somethings can do things. So, like even an atmosphere can carry sound because the molecules are tied to each other under tension, and you can vibrate that tension. You can send a signal through it. And so you could call it a field of atmosphere, but the point is there has to be substance in the field. The field isn't nothing, it's a something, and the something in the field is usually in the form of some kind of force. There are force bits, and the force would be magnetism that ties the atoms to each other, the proton and the electron, and the force bits that are communicated between them. And so the real field is really those force bits ultimately in every case, but it's a field of something, and not a field of nothing. But the idea of an ether or something never really, that wasn't what I was thinking in terms of the way of a field. The field was always something you could generate. You turn the magnet on, something happens in the atmosphere, in the sense that there's stuff in it now. Stuff of a different kind. Something's changed it. So now it's doing that magnetic thing. Now I understand what that is in the sense that it's polarization. All you're doing is segregating force bits, north-south in the case of a magnet, but plus-minus or blue-green, or however you want to identify. There are two different forms of polarization.
No, Heaviside, Maxwell. No, field theory is, at best, is pure speculation. What?
So he did add Maxwell this time, so, you know. But anyways, just does the same name dropping. There's no argument of any mechanics here.
What if the universe were so simple? We work off these premises of, you know, if you're trying to understand the cosmos, you have to be an atomist, or you have to believe in the quantum fairy tale of, and of course, quantum is atomism. By its very definition, quantum or quantity is atomism. And
Yes, that it breaks down into these discrete clumps of event. So like a photon. And, you know, you think the photon represents some package of disturbance in a field of some kind, some sort of ether, and maybe perhaps you think that disturbance does communicate across the universe without even having to travel there or something. But, you know, yeah, people understand it as little discrete bits of something. Now, it doesn't matter what the something is. You can make the something out of anything, but you're just saying it's a something that has properties. And the properties are it moves in a straight line in a direction at the speed of light. And that's made evident by functioning light bulbs and, you know, the reliability of the manipulations of this electromagnetic form of force. But that's what it is. It's a force. It's the little bits that move the material bits.
everything and all interactions are based in according to their illogical, upside-down, brain-dead insanity.
Right. Is all that rhetoric necessary? I mean, you know, it's just so preposterously over the top. This isn't people defending pedophilia or something. There's lots of evidence for this theory of matter, this material view. And, you know, I reduce it even simpler, is that these little bits are the only bits there really are. These little force bits, you know, the photons. And they have the two polarizations, so you could think of it as, you know, two orientations. It doesn't really matter. And then you have these material bits that are probably made out of the same thing, just stuck together. But anyway, let's just call these material bits. So forces can't interact with forces. You can't bang a photon into a photon. But a photon can hit a material bit. And then that material bit can move, and that can affect another force bit. So the way forces, that is, movement of force in one way and movement of force in another way, can interact, because they would just go through each other without this matter bit. And the matter bit's just a conduit, and it moves whichever way the forces balance it. It doesn't have any agenda of its own. It's completely dependent on what forces it possesses. And when you have big material objects that contain these atoms, then it can actually contain little bits of force in a direction. And those bits of force in a direction can give it a permanent velocity. You know, that will be some percentage of the speed of the force, some percentage of the speed of light. Can't go the speed of light because then it's going the same speed as the loose force. It can't do that without being the loose force.
Based upon particle interactions. The light of understanding the universe only required a primer. A primer would be like the Rosetta Stone. You know what the Rosetta Stone was before the Rosetta Stone came along? We really couldn't understand Egyptian hieroglyphs. We still don't. The people out there that actually translate Egyptian hieroglyphs still have it all wrong, but they kind of got a rudimentary ability to read it. However, when you read the translations, they're nonsensical. Yes.
Yeah, well, actually, the Rosetta Stone was really a translator between a language that they could convert hieroglyphics into, and then they needed a translator between that language and, like, Roman or whatever, and that's what the Rosetta Stone provided. But anyway, it didn't really have hieroglyphs translated, but yeah, it doesn't matter.
So we still don't actually understand Egyptian hieroglyphs, at least the idiots that translate it don't.
Well, yes, the Rosetta Stone wasn't complete vocabulary, so yes, it only had half the alphabet, so to speak.
That's another matter. So we have to talk about a primer. And nobody has the primer. The primer is really so simple. And when you ever define Mother Nature as a persona, which of course it's not.
Yeah, so Mother Nature words in a physics video I don't think is very constructive either. So name dropping, redundancy, perpetual metaphors and analogies rather than any actual drawings of any actual mechanical process. I don't think any of this stuff is really useful as a description of reality. So if you're going to make these bold claims that you have the truth, it ought to be in some form that a person isn't, you're going to make these silly accusations that they're brain dead, knuckle dragging Looney Tunes because they don't understand what you're saying. I mean, it's just amazing that you can be, so out of touch with any kind of reality.
We're not talking about a nerdy chick in high heels with a advanced Western digital calculator that has.
Right. So he keeps making this argument that nature is simple, and yet he keeps explaining processes that aren't at all simple. This hyperboloid and the toroid and the all these complex shapes and movements for which there's no explanation for how anything knows how to move that way or why it moves that way or any kind of mechanics to it all. It's quite complicated, your description of reality, not simple. And yet you keep claiming you have a simple model when your model is so unsimple that you can't even draw a picture of it. I mean, I can draw a picture of something with momentum. Okay, I can say there's empty space and there's these little things with momentum, and they move in a straight line. They go from point A to point B in a straight line. And if they hit an electron, then they can go in a new direction. And if they're polarized, that means they can be filtered, and that means if they're one form of polarization, they go this way, and if they're the other form, they go this way, so they can be filtered. And that simple mechanism is your primer. That's that simple truth. These little bits of energy, these little tons, hitting electrons, is the universe. Everything we know is made out of those interactions.
Graph functions on it. We're talking about like a hairy armpit chick with like dirty feet who looks like she's smuggling hamsters underneath her arms. Everything is force and motion, inertia and acceleration.
Force and motion, inertia, acceleration. I mean, obviously, okay, force and motion. So what does that say to anybody? I mean, force, by definition, a force is something that creates motion. So we sort of know that. And then inertia and acceleration, well, there's also velocity. So everything that moves isn't being accelerated. Some things have velocity, like the speed of light. And it is in every respect a perpetual velocity. The little ton of energy, the quanta of energy, I think it's pretty established by the evidence that that little bit of energy doesn't stop. You can't consume it. You can't kill it. You can't destroy it. All you can do is trap it. All you can do is get it caught in a circle. But you can't stop it. It goes somewhere. It's like friction. You can just follow. You can follow energy. You can put energy into some system, and you can pull every bit of it back out of the system. It doesn't go anywhere. It's always still there.
Resistance, permeability, and permittivity.
So, permeability, permittivity. So this has something to do with how well something goes through. So there's resistance and non-resistance. Okay, so that would be permittivity and permittivity or whatever. So it's resistance and non-resistance so it's something either interacts or doesn't interact. Maybe it could be stated that way. But these are concepts you're putting in language that's completely unnecessarily obtuse, and it doesn't say anything. Again, inertia and acceleration, when you don't even account for velocity, you know, you're not making even a complete definition of the words. Acceleration, write that down. And what would be acceleration? Acceleration is the absorbing the force of one of these tons. That's what accelerates these electrons. I should have drawn that in this image, but yeah, this photon hits for a period of time. It stays inside this little bit, the little bit moves, and then the energy is released. That's it. Yes, acceleration. And then the transfer of the energy to a new location.
Divergence and centripetal convergence.
Okay, so centripetal convergence and divergence. Like, somehow this does anybody any good. Now, I'd say it's probably good to have the idea of the squared circle, you know, the 4 right turns that get you a trap, right? All you got to do is do these 4 right turns, and there you are. You got a circle. So the idea that circles, traps, this would be the nature of a trap, right? I mean, you take one of these straight line things and you create a mechanism that obliges it to do this circle thing, then this energy is trapped until you break this circle. The energy can't go anywhere, can't do anything. It's immobilized. It goes in every direction. That's what a circle is. You go in every direction a little tiny bit, and so you end up right back at where you started. Yes, that's an important feature of the material universe. That's what all this stuff is. That's why you can make a nuclear bomb out of little tiny bits of matter. It's because inside it's a bunch of these photons, this stuff with perpetual motion, trapped in circles. I think they're squares, but regardless, trapped in geometry, circular geometry, circular in the expansive definition of the word circular. And yeah, that's the whole function of matter, is to store, to trap that energy.
Only 2 principles in the universe: the loss of inertia and increasing...
So the loss of inertia. Inertia just has to do with your condition. Any condition is an inertial condition. So you can be moving or not moving, and inertia would be an appropriate word to apply to the condition. So it's a description of your condition. So a lack of inertia doesn't say anything. Saying a lack of velocity is saying something. So, you know, you can say matter traps energy and nullifies its velocity, you could almost argue. It's probably you don't want to imply that it destroys the velocity, because it doesn't destroy it. It just traps it. So you need a word for trap. But I mean, this whole idea to say lack of inertia, like that means something. How can it mean anything? It's not. It's not the proper class of a word to say you can have a lack of it. It's like saying a lack of skin on a human or something. It just doesn't make any sense. To say that, well, I don't want to get into a race thing, but you know, to say that people with dark skin are people that lack white skin would be a nonsensical way of describing the person.
Inertia and acceleration. Human beings have everything upside down. We think of power. Just let's use the word power and energy. When you think of power and energy, you think like an atomic bomb or like a massive generator, lighting up 1 billion lights on the New York City skyline.
Yes, that would be a pretty rational way to use the words, because power and energy are these things, these bits moving. And when you release those bits, you'll see that the world changes, change happens. So power and energy, usually when there's a lot of it released, you're going to see change happen. Stuff's going to move.
That's not power. That's the impotency of power. What we
It's an impotency of power. So that's the absence of power, the absence of a release of something that was trapped and stored. So again, he doesn't think you store energy in a battery, that there's actual atomic bits that go into the battery, bits that have this motion, this perpetual motion power, and they're trapped inside the battery in circles, squares, but same thing.
Think of as power like an atomic explosion. That's not power. That's the loss of power. True.
So the loss of power. Now, so I'm a knuckle dragging, loony moron, spinach eating, whatever kook, because I associate nuclear bombs with the release of energy, the release of something that exists, that is real, and it's released. And he's saying it's not the presence of energy; it's the absence of energy. I mean, what, are you just being contrary to be contrary, right? I mean, you sort of explained how you don't really like being a normal thing, and you don't like, doing, being conventional. So what is this, just anti-conventional for the sake of it? I mean, and you're telling us we have it upside down. Yeah, I think you're a little back-ass wording.
Power would be in that 2.5 pound lump of U-235 or plutonium. Neptunium is also fissionable. That secret was released in like 2001, Department of Energy. Also.
Yes, well, just about everything is probably fissionable if you want to go to the trouble to go through all the processes it would take to get it to that state. So yes, it's going to take more processing to make a bomb, but you can make a bomb out of probably any atom. You just have to keep enriching it.
Found out that Neptunium was fissionable, which I knew it was the case that it had to be before I discovered that. Anyway, that's not power. That's the loss of power. Everything is force and motion.
Right. How do you say so? Everything's force and motion, acceleration, inertia. How do you get away with that? I mean, how do you think somebody's going to react to that, saying it's not power, it's the absence of power? When everything, I mean, just volumes and volumes and volumes of physics demonstrate that this whole enriching thing has to happen. You actually have to put energy in, okay, to get energy out. And the thing with uranium is, it's already put a lot of the energy in. There's a whole bunch of atomic weight in there that's very unstable. So it's easy to get it to go wacky, okay, and fall apart and give you lots of free little bits.
Take a 14 or 12-year-old person and explain to them what a vortex is. Now, as simple as that is, I mean, really simple things. Like, what is a vortex? No one's defined. I defined that in my 4th edition of my book, which is free, and Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism. And it's really...
like this whole vortex thing is somehow critical to this mechanism of what? To what? How does it make things? How does it make magnets repel each other and attract each other? How does it make the Earth move around the sun? How does vortex? How does a little tornado thingy? How exactly does the tornado universe work?
It's simple. What a vortex is. What is magnetism? What differentiates out a magnetic field from a non-magnetic field from the same?
Filtering. So yeah, it's as much simpler than even I imagined. But yes, I have the correct answer. And I granted, regular physics doesn't have much any answer that's useful. But it's really quite simple, actually. There's two polarizations, and the magnet just filters those two polarizations. So anything that goes in, let's say X and O's or something, arrows and circles. So if an arrow goes in here, it comes out a circle here. And if a circle goes in here, it comes out a circle. So everything gets turned into a circle coming out this way, and everything gets turned into an arrow going out this way. And when that happens, the circles, the stuff that makes circles, so this is the north side, let's say, and this is the south side, the north sides repel because circles bounce off of circle-making stuff, and arrows bounce off of arrow-making stuff, and so that's the nature of repulsion. And the attraction would be the inverse, obviously. The arrow force creates acceleration going out in the north side, and the circles create acceleration. These are absorbed. So it's just about the difference between something being absorbed and something being reflected. Really simple.
Lump of neodymium iron boron or samarium cobalt or ferrite before it becomes a quote-unquote magnet. It's field coherency. But what is that field?
Field coherency. What field of what? Again, see, I would argue there's a field created by a magnet, and it's just because this photons that we don't see are traveling all the time through everything all the time, and this filter segregates those two forms, and so the energy is made out of the field energy. It's the same energy that is pushing the Earth into the sun. The entire universe, I mean, I don't want to do my theory and his theory on top of his, but I mean, that's the only way to explain it really, is to do the context thing. Yeah, I had a good image of the I lost it already. Anyway, arrows. Field of arrows. It's rotating. I had it right there. I had it right there. The bill I gotta pay. Anyway, moving on.
Coherency. What is the geomagnetic precession? What is the reciprocating precessional hyperbola? That sounds like fancy words, but they're not. They're just simplex field pressure geometry.
Simplex fields. I mean, none of this has anything to do with any kind of, build it a level at a time kind of rhetoric. Nothing. There's just no way to make any of that into anything. I don't know how people can just lap this stuff up when it doesn't say anything about. It doesn't describe anything about this thing at all. I don't know I don't even know what to metaphor. It's just like somebody seeing a deer or something and saying it's a, hyperborealoided, I mean, what's all this? None of these words have anything to do with fur and legs and a head and eyes and antlers. You're not describing a single thing that any person who has any knowledge of mechanics can relate to.
The hypertrochoidal pattern that you see underneath the ferrocell. I knew that had to be the case before I even heard about and discovered the ferrocell several years ago. Mother Nature and field mechanics are very simple. Modern science, with all its great supercomputers and all its assholes, and I have to use the word assholes very succinctly, people that are eschewing and spewing all this nonsense upon the mind.
Right, and that's exactly what you're doing, in my opinion. I mean, you're the much worse offender. At least they provide some evidence. Much of it sometimes bullshit and made up, but clearly you're just spouting with no evidence. Just nothing. You don't have a model. You're not using rationally coherent words to describe the fur and the reality of the thing. It has ears. I mean, it has a tongue. You're not using a single word that has anything to do with real mechanical things.
Lines of the masses. If quantum theory has any basis in reality, that there are magic unicorn particles, basically. Of course, the photon, for example. There's everything that you take for granted, like the electron particle. Every intelligent person in field theory, including Nikola Tesla, Oliver Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell, they said the notion of a charge-carrying particle, i.e. the quote-unquote electron, is bullshit.
Right, so Maxwell does all these equations on charged particles, and Maxwell says it was bullshit. Obviously, that didn't happen. And what these other people thought, I don't know what it is they thought, but it seems quite obvious they're wrong in the sense that, frankly, charge is what makes your magnetism possible. So I guess you just don't quite understand that. But there is no magnetism without the fact that the electron is the filter, okay, for one polarization. The proton filters the other polarization. They're the thing that makes it possible for the energy to create the difference between the right turn and the left turn. If it hits the proton, at left turn hits the right, left. That's what makes it possible for the universe to do something. Is the fact that those two different polarizations create attraction and repulsion.
They didn't use the word bullshit, but that's what they said. J.J. Thomson, the quote-unquote discoverer of the supposed electron, he denied for quite the longest time that it was a particle. I mean, it's not. It's a force vector of dielectric discharge.
A force vector of dielectric discharge. So that's how he describes this deer. So, what does that look like? What's a force vector of dielectric discharge look like? the box. You know, what happens when a photon goes in? What happens? Is it the Feynman diagram? Does the photon go in and the electron moves and then the photon goes out? Or what is your counter theory? What does this box do of this dielectric vectory thing? I mean, that's all we really are trying to do is describe what it does. We really don't care what it's made of, right? We just care what does it do and how does it move through a piece of matter.
But he was offered the Nobel Prize, great fame, and he accepted that it was a particle. Of course, it's not a particle. The notion that light is comprised up of other particles, photons. The photon is a purely conceptual and purely a human concept that has no basis in reality. Everything that we...
Purely a concept, right. Well, who cares? It's a concept that's pretty reliable. We know it's discretable. That is, we can filter for photons. We can have 4 photons or 10 photons or 5,000 photons. We can, we can recognize that they have the function of a frequency. I would just argue that's the distance between them, but whatever. So they can have properties that we can define. Whether they're made out of horse shit or bear feathers, it really doesn't matter. What they're made out of doesn't matter. We're just trying to say, what are they? What do they do? You don't need to understand the deer's guts to understand that the deer walks around and eats your garden.
We take for granted about understanding. Nobody cares about field theory. Most people don't care about field theory because it doesn't get them rich or laid, right? It doesn't buy you a fancy house.
So again, the last video was just talking about how there's no fields and this blah blah blah, and now he's field theory as if fields are fundamental. So again, and what all he's really talking about is some ether field. I don't know if he believes in any other field. There's one field, there's 5 fields. Is there an electric field and a magnetic field? Do you believe in that? What is the nature of this stuff that you say it's not a deer, it's a fur field, and a leg field, and a hoof field, and an antler field?
Nobody cares about that stuff. I care about that stuff. All the really important stuff, the big questions that have not been answered by modern science. Of course, they think they've answered it. They've come up with insane... Have you ever read QED's Strange Theory of Light and Matter by Richard Feynman? That brain-dead, mental midget, that knuckle-dragging simian, he's now dead.
All of that rhetoric's necessary somehow. I mean, Feynman, if you want, you can critique him all you like. I mean, I don't like everything Feynman said. I don't like much of what Feynman said. But to imply that he was stupid or that he was somehow doing something insincere is idiotic. And some of the stuff he did, like I said, the Feynman diagram, the idea of just, making it visible to see what the mathematics were doing. What's wrong with that? But, I mean, I guess he didn't like Feynman because Feynman was still clinging to this idea that there was some sense that a photon is first a particle that has a function that people can describe as a wave function, I suppose.
Yeah, I think he's the one that said if anybody says that they understand quantum theory is lying or something to that effect. I mean, quantum mechanics has absolutely no basis in reality.
So again, this idea that has no basis is idiotic. Obviously, the relationship, it would start off as quantum electrodynamics, and it started off as recognizing that the relationship between the tons, the force bits, and the electrons and the protons was just basically everything. It's happening all the time, and it's the reason why atoms are held together, and it's the reason why molecules and everything else function is because of that relationship between these force bits and the matter bits.
That forces and fields and charges and discharges have anything to do with like little particles. You really think that Mother Nature is just some, crazy broad that's...
So he keeps doing this. I mean, we've all heard this. Anybody's watched any of Ken's videos over and over and over and over, this whole thing about this Mother Nature bullshit. It's physics, Ken. Now, you want to say, oh, do you believe in infinities? Do you believe... I mean, there's lots of ways of describing the nature of physics, and you could say, well, that sounds preposterous, and that sounds preposterous. Because you don't have any evidence of the origins of the universe, and you don't know what exactly the nature of the smallest bit is. Like what is the photon made out of? Is it made out of Jello pudding, or is it made out of rock or a crystal, or is it really a thing, a little metal-y shaped bullet? You don't know. But does that mean physics can't happen because we don't have those answers? We can't describe, again, it could be a mechanical, the deer could be a fake deer, could be a machine, you know, a Terminator deer. Does it really matter if it's just doing deer? If it just walks around and eats grass 99.9999999% of the time? Can't we just call it deer?
Got a bag of magic unicorn particles? I mean, do you really think the universe works that way?
So again, because Feynman said this about a photon, it travels from point A to point B in a straight line until it hits a photon, an electron. So, at a constant speed, the speed of light. So that's a unicorn theory. Recognizing that a photon travels in a straight line from point A to point B at a constant speed is a unicorn theory.
If I expel X number of calories to punch somebody in the face, and someone ignorantly in the sidelines think that that is a particle that hit someone in the face, like, no, it was a discharge that actually energized my muscles, which went forward, and I actually...
Yes, and that's what the calories are made out of. You're giving up your stored, the stuff that was in traps, you're releasing the stuff in traps, you're using up matter, converting it into energy, releasing the tons, sending them to some other part of your body. The body part moves. That's again, the force bits being released to push this part of my body in a direction. And the end result is going to be is when my matter hits your matter, my electrons and protons and the force between them are going to create a force pressure. So like this magnet, the little ping pong ball, so to speak, bouncing between the two things, you know, the fist, okay, and your face. I don't know, I make that an eyeball, I guess. Put a little nose on there and a little... What's going to happen is when these two things impact each other, there's going to be little force bits. Alright, and they're going to start off bouncing very wide. And as it gets closer, they're going to start bouncing closer and closer and closer, closer. So there's going to be a lot more hits of the energy. It's going to be bouncing and reflecting. And that's going to create pressure. And that pressure is going to deform your face.
Had a longitudinal...
But you have to create pressure behind the fist for it to do that. That means you have to... force has to be pushed through the atoms. Bits of energy, bits of force have to move through your arm, through your fist, into your face.
Factor of energy dissipation with someone's face. You punch them in. If you said that was a particle...
Again, it's a quanta, so yes, it's whatever a photon is. That's the thing, that's the force. That's the thing that a bunch of them pile up on one side of something. There's a bunch of them on one side, and there's very few on the other side. And so the matter bit in the middle goes the direction of the lower pressure. It absorbs this pressure, holds it for a while, and moves with it because of it. The energy of this directionality gets absorbed by this thing, and it accelerates in the direction that into the low pressure.
This is what modern science believes. We're in an age of atomistic nonsense that has no basis in reality.
And so, again, no basis in reality except just about every physical experiment ever conducted verifies the mechanism, verifies the fact that force affects matter bits move, creating force pressure.
Up. Watching all these idiots on field theory and how the cosmos works, black holes, The notion of
Yes, a lot of the stuff they talk about is bullshit, but then you even start talking about black holes. So you can't say, you can't do it both ways. Either you think they exist or they don't exist.
curved space and time. Time is not a thing. Time is a measure. There's no such thing.
Time isn't just a measure, but whatever. Time is the fact that the speed of light exists. Something's going slower than instantaneous. So as long as your smallest bit is going slower than instantaneous, then you have time. If the smallest bit went instantaneous speed, then there'd be no time, because everything would happen that fast. So yes, there's slowness in this thing we call the atomistic universe, or whatever, the material universe, and that amount of slowness makes it possible for things to happen in an order after each other. Cause and then effect, not cause-effect. If you have cause-effect, you don't have anything. If you have cause and then the effect later, then yes, time exists.
The thing is time. Time is an arbitrary concept used to measure the passage of magnitudes. Time has no reality.
The passage of magnitude. So how does that say anything to anybody rational? How can you say something like that? I'm supposed to believe that if I wrote that on a piece of paper and handed it to 100 people, they would know what that means. Passage of magnitude. What? I mean, how do you get away with that? No, time exists because it takes photons time to go from point A to point B. And if it didn't take photons time to do that, then there wouldn't be any time.
Time has no reality at all. That fact was discovered 4,000 years ago, like the ancient writings of the rope snake. You should look up the ancient Indian rope snake analogy, where someone would actually die of something that didn't exist. They think it's a snake in the middle of the night. That was
Yeah, so I've heard this analogy at least 6 times now. What does it have to do with you claiming that time doesn't really happen, or that it's not a real concept that we rationally label? We rationally label the idea that it takes a certain amount of the speed of light for something to happen. We can compare it to something. Now, we don't have to compare everything to the speed of light anymore, because we have lots of other things that are in sequence that just do the cause and effect thing in sequence and create a clock, and we can make measurements of how long it takes for mechanical processes to happen. But the ultimate process that is the definer of it is the force of gravity, the force of magnetism, the force of light. They all move at the same speed, and it's the fact that that speed is something less than instantaneous is why we have a universe that we can talk about the word time in, because time exists now, because something's moving less than instantaneously.
was poisonous. It was really a piece of rope. Like, how could something that doesn't exist cause something else to happen? These things don't exist. All of these particles, I mean, the 4 Maxwellian equations for fields never define a field. They only define an effect over a period of time.
So again, the same argument over and over and over again. Clearly, the equations do a great deal to quantize how much energy will go through these charged elements, the electrons and the protons, ultimately the magnets, and even a conductor, and that you can quantize exactly how much force you can push through something and what kind of effect the filter will have on that, and how it will be dispersed, like the energy of a light bulb being dispersed by the inverse square law. And all of that Maxwell formalized into an equations that just basically summarize that process. Nothing unicorn in that.
Curved space-time. Space has no properties. Space can't act upon or do anything.
Well, agreed, and they should have never allowed the fun rhetoric, the fun little terminology, space-time, to be used, because it was just such a lie. Because obviously it's a kind of an ether. So they should have called it what it is from the beginning and just said, we believe there's some underlying structure which is feeling the mass of objects and in some way converging into massive objects and dragging other things in through that flow of bent. They used to call electricity a liquid, and it's almost the same thing. The mathematics is the same. Susskind actually teaches gravity by comparing it to water on a sheet of glass, and with an even pressure, and it flows. So they should have used some other analogy, but it's not space.
Space is no different than saying a shadow. Time is only a measure. These things do not act upon other things, nor are they the basis for interaction. It's absolutely impossible to think that they are. It's illogical and insane.
Oh, whatever. It's insane to understand that the gravity happens and magnetism happens, and to surmise that there must be a mechanism that causes the effect. And obviously I'm arguing that the mechanism is quite simple, and it just has to do with the ability to polarize these little bits that have perpetual motion and to trap elements of that motion.
Insane. It's absolutely insane. Space and time are not things. Time is a measure. Space has no existence. There's no such thing as a God.
Yes, time is a function. Calling it a measure just doesn't mean anything, because it's kind of obvious as a byproduct of time existing is that you can measure it. But the point is, it's a function of matter. Time exists because matter doesn't move instantaneously fast. It doesn't traverse distance instantaneously. That's why time exists. It's a consequence of the function of matter. It doesn't exist separate from the function of matter.
Photon. It's an arbitrary concept with no basis in reality.
See, it's not arbitrary and it's not without basis. So those two words are nonsensical. It's not erroneous or without substantive cause, to fit the arbitrary word. No, there is reason to believe. Clear reason.
Actually look up the origins of the word and the concept of the photon. It is purely an arbitrary concept that has stuck. It is a light quantity, das Lichtquant, as the idiot Einstein said. Now, when I call Einstein an idiot, let me...
Yeah, well, really, it's just, you're just being an asshole. I mean, he obviously wasn't an idiot, but, I mean, it's just showing you don't have an argument or something. You're not doing the high ground thing here, obviously. You're doing the low ball thing. So that, people have to throw that kind of mud. It's usually not because they have a good argument.
Referred to specifically to Nikola Tesla, who specifically said that Einstein was a, quote, fuzzy-haired crackpot and idiot.
Right, so because Tesla said it, it's okay to say it. And Einstein was rather gracious about that, in that he didn't say when Tesla died, yeah, he was a fucking little scummy shit talker. So, I mean, obviously Einstein took the high ground, had the high ground, because Einstein had the rational argument and Tesla had the irrational one.
So not only do I think that Einstein was an idiot, the guy that actually invented the modern world, unlike the dumbass Einstein who invented nothing, said that Einstein was an idiot and a fuzzy-haired crackpot and a fool for believing in...
Yeah, well, whatever. All this crap about Tesla inventing anything is kind of just silly. He made a few modifications to things that were already invented, and that's all he did.
The space as something that acted upon other things. Everything in modern science that we're led to believe and brought up on is absolute bullshit. It doesn't even jive with simplex logic of a child. A child would... That doesn't make any sense.
All right, and if I threw any of your jargon at any grammar school kid, whatever that magnitude crap was and all the other bullshit you spew, they're not going to understand a single word of it. You know it. So you're just talking shit. Where if I explain to them that there's bits, and there's some little tiny bits, and then there's medium-sized bit, and there's bigger bits. And depending on what size you are, little bits can push things a little bit, medium-sized bits can push things a little more, big bits can push things a lot, because they have a lot more stuff in them. I'm sure they're going to be able to understand that.
Someone that doesn't have preconceptions, like, well, so-and-so's professor has got a PhD hanging on a wall, of course it's true. It's like, no. Every aspect of science throughout the ages has always been the case that 30, 40, 50 years later, every new branch of science in the same field is...
Yeah, whatever. So this is the silliest argument made. The fallacy from everything's wrong because they were wrong in the past fallacy. I mean, it's the silliest thing ever. Like, we never figure out a truth. We're never going to figure out that the Earth is round, a sphere. We're never going to figure out that there's a distance between the moon and the moon isn't made out of cardboard or, cheese. No, we'll never learn anything, ever. And everything we learn will always be wrong. It'll always be proven wrong. It's just stupid. Now, we figured out a lot of stuff. Still making mistakes, yes. But, yeah, we got a lot of right answers now.
Well, those guys didn't know what the hell they were talking about. Now it's no different. All we've done is we've quantized and atomized.
Yeah, right. No different, except, yes, we have big aluminum planes flying through the atmosphere. We have all kinds of things that work and are functional and are happening because we actually do understand the physics, a substantial amount of it. So again, this false argument that we haven't progressed and that we aren't getting a more and more refined view. Yes, I'd say for the last 100 years they've been on a horrible sidetrack because they wrote on the stone tablet. They wrote it in the stone when they should have just drawn it on the stone first and said, let's just live with this for a while and see if it makes sense. But they made Einstein into something you can carve into the rock, and that was a mistake.
Just cosmic interactions. If you actually read the assholes, and I have to use that word, assholes.
No, you don't have to. You really don't. You really don't have to do that. It's just completely excessive, and you're talking about dead people, which makes you really weak. I mean, it's really weak sauce to be picking fights with the dead. So, I mean, why don't you pick a fight with the living instead? And why don't you show that you have some willingness to defend the crap you're saying to the people you're crapping on? Why don't you call somebody in a live room a knuckle-dragging moron and shit like that? Why don't you do that? Why don't you have the courage? I'm willing to defend their silly theory, even though I don't believe it, against your more silly, absolute pull-out-of-your-ass nonsense and your silly vocabulary. So if you want to call me a knuckle-dragging moron, all that shit, in a live room because I'm going to defend a theory that's a lot more rational than your bullshit, even though I don't believe it.
Fields. They will tell you that like a magnetic field is particles, so-called virtual photons. Modern science thinks that nothing travels faster than light, but light is not a speed, it's a rate of induction.
Well, whatever. See, again, light isn't a speed, even though, yes, it's reliably and consistently moves at the speed, so let's just pretend it doesn't. Of course it does. It's one of the properties of the deer. It eats the grass, and he's basically saying, no, it doesn't eat grass. The grass jumps in its mouth. I mean,
There's no such thing as the speed of light. But they actually cannot explain instantaneous action at a distance. It's impossible for them. It's been measured many, many times.
Okay, well, show me where it's been measured many, many times in some by physicists who believe your theory. First, that would be interesting. But show me where it's been measured, and then I'll show how that experiment. Let me show me an experiment you think is actually revealing the truth. One of these modern experiments. I mean, all the ones you're denying the existence of, and then you're saying selectively, I like these spooky action ones. And I'll be glad to dissect it with you and see and test you on how much you understand how this experiment is at all detecting what they claim it to be detecting.
Countless times. But, they think that nothing travels faster than the speed of light, but light is not speed, except it's a rate of induction. They can't even explain to you how light is able to speed up after leaving glass.
Well, again, so another silly notion. So again, he's claiming that physicists believe that light actually does slow down and then it speeds up. When, no, most physicists don't believe that. So again, that's just a pure straw man. That's just basically lying about the existing physicists and what they believed. So now he has to resort to a silly lie, to defend his argument, because it doesn't have anything to do with what they theorize is happening. They don't think the force is slowing down. It's just the force has to travel through, so it's like I've said before in the other video, it's like fiber optics. The light doesn't slow down in a fiber optic cable. It just travels more distance because it reflects off the inside of the cable.
Light slows down and enters glass. It doesn't slow down, it's a rate of induction because everything's capacitance, resistance, permeability, and permittivity. It would break the law of the conservation of energy to even believe in everything that modern quantum and science believes happens to light after it leaves a certain medium, like water or light, which slows down at different rates depending on the medium that it's passing through. But light is not passing through anything. Light doesn't move. That's something else Walter Russell got.
Light doesn't move. I mean, that makes any sense at all. One of the most reliably measured things that moves from point A to point B, from one place to another place.
Got right. There's no such thing as a motion of light. A person in the middle of a pond flapping his arms is not moving towards the edge of the pond. He's actually setting up a perturbation in the water. Those waves are extending outward, but waves are not things. Waves are not what something is.
Yeah, whatever. So again, he claims that there's water. Okay, there's not just atmosphere here and all that stuff. There's water between us and the moon. Some kind of medium that's being waved, but not waved in any kind of way where it spreads or does any of that stuff. It coaxial cables in some way. But there's no description of this thing, this mechanism that's carrying the simplest bit of energy in the known universe. The smallest quanta of stuff is somehow being conveyed by, like, the Golden Gate Bridge or something. There's a whole infrastructure that makes it possible for the light to transmit from one place to another place. So it's not a property of the photon, it's somehow a property of the ether.
A wave is what something does. It's a field perturbation.
Alright, again, so a field perturbation, which is just some sort of notion that he has there's a bunch of infinite dominoes filling all of space somehow, and then you poke one of them and all the